guys, welcome back to the Tech Check for Season 2, Episode 18. Before we begin, here's a word from our sponsor.
Today's sponsor is Anchor. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. It has creation tools that allows you to create and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer. Anchor also distributes your podcast for you on multiple platforms such as Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can make money with no minimum listenership, and everything is in one place to create a podcast. Download Anchor on the App Store or Play Store, or you can go to anchor.fm to create your podcast today.
All right, guys, welcome back to the Tech Check. Today we have Mr. Krueger from EyeTrac. So could you give us a little bit of a description about what EyeTrac is?
Sure. Well, again, I'm Dr. Wes Krueger. I'm the CEO of EyeTrac and IRPM. IRPM is a product of EyeTrac, and I previously practiced skull-base surgery for 34 years. And during that period of time, I was always interested and involved in doing eye tracking, and had a number of patents, and I've had over 20 issued patents. I have a lot of others pending, but it's all related to eye tracking and head tracking. But many years ago, I became interested in concussions and tracking eye movements as they are related to concussions, because every time you have a concussion, you always have abnormal eye movements. I ran a concussion clinic for several years, and currently concussions in contact sports are increasing, and they're increasing significantly. And many of you have probably read or seen the movie Concussion that was out, I think, several years ago. But it's what's interesting about concussions, it's the secondary concussions, and those that happen very close in timing to the first concussion. Those are always much more dangerous. There's more mortality or morbidity associated with them. So those are the concussions that we are interested in preventing. So our mission is to mitigate these concussions, and particularly these secondary concussions that are closely related. We know that if you've had concussions, or which are also called traumatic brain injuries, and repeated injuries, they can have long-term disabling cognitive deficits. I've had many friends playing high school ball, and they went on and played college football, and there are a couple of them who have had significant cognitive deficits after playing college ball. I've actually had another family member who played pro ball, was a linebacker, and he has significant cognitive deficits now, and he was in the pro football area for about 15 years. So it's a life-changing problem, and it affects all the family members. And currently, there are no really good, accurate tools to make real-time any kind of judgments on the field, and certainly in real time. But what has been identified as being the most accurate measure has been the eye movements, and measuring eye movements. Now, these are very fine eye movements. You cannot see them with the naked eye. You really have to use eye tracking sensors. So IRPM, in essence, is technology that uses sensor fuse technology and applies it to a face guard. Specifically, in the face guard, we have mounted eye tracking sensors. And these sensors will take minimally about 120 frames a second of where your eye position is, and it will compare it with, for example, your head movements and your activity. And if it's if it measures any kind of abnormal movements, it will then send a signal wirelessly to a smart device on the sideline. So it's always monitoring the athlete, but only if there's an abnormal eye movement will it transmit this information to the sideline to alert those on the sideline to have that player removed from the field of play so they don't get the secondary concussions.
One question I have, you said that it's mainly integrated into the face mask for football players. How do you integrate it so that, it doesn't detract from, a player's vision or, from the comfortability of the helmet?
Well, that's a very good question. And so I want to define really a face guard because sometimes people confuse the face guard with the visors or the face shields. So you've seen many football players that have something that looks like it's a clear visor. Sometimes they have some color to them to prevent the glare of the sun. But these are the cages that you've seen. They're metal, sometimes other materials, but they always have an opening for to enable the player to have good visual ability of the field of play. So they're never obstructing the vision. Now, within one of the bars, on the player side of the bar, you could see two tiny holes, and embedded within those little holes are these lenses. These are special lenses. They're very small. So you can imagine the size of about a number 2 pencil eraser in the diameter. That's about the size of these holes with the cameras. The head tracking sensor, we mount that in the side of the face guard out of the visual field.
Interesting. So, a question that I had was, what sports, in your opinion, are most prone to concussions, and what sports do you mainly make your concussion gear for? I know you spoke about football, but is there any other sports that that are applicable to this?
Sure. Basically, any contact sport. So this can be applicable to hockey, lacrosse, and there's some baseball, particularly softball, and some of the other sports that may be used in Europe. But as long as there's contact, as long as the individual is using a helmet, the face guard can be applied to it. We also have plans to use it in the rodeo circuit, bull riding, and some of those type of sports have a great need to assess the athletes that are participating in those sports. Now, what we're going to do first, and we're starting with the youth football, particularly because that's the largest group in football and the ones that have the greatest number of concussions. So you're talking about really ages somewhere between 6 years of age and 19 years of age. So it's a large population group. Annually, it encompasses about 3.8 million athletes yearly.
About how many of those athletes are actually using EyeTrac equipment? I know you just say you mainly go to high school athletes, but about how many athletes, like as of right now, are using EyeTrac equipment?
Right now, there are no athletes using it because we're still in the testing phase right now. So our plan is we will begin testing in the spring with spring football. We'll make some further refinements to the technology, making certain that the cameras are always positioned correctly in the right area to track the eyes appropriately. We have a software algorithm that we may adjust a little bit more after the spring football season. And then by the end of the year, that is by the fall, early fall, we will begin to manufacture and start our sales. So we don't have anybody yet who is wearing this. We're still in the early startup phase of this development.
Moving on just slightly. What inspired the foundation of EyeTrac? Like, what's the story behind, the whole creation of the company?
Well, it really started because as a physician, I saw a lot of head trauma. Before I did my own specialty, I was doing general surgery, saw a lot of automobile injuries, lots of other type of traumatic injuries related to the head. Then I went through and did another a residency. I did a lot of maxillofacial trauma work during that residency period, and then I went on and did another fellowship related to a lateral skull-based surgery discipline. So I worked around the brain, the brainstem, and the base of the skull quite a bit, and periodically saw individuals, most often were youth, who had traumatic injuries, usually vehicular related, of the base of the skull. But throughout my whole career, the last 34 years, in the office, we did a lot of eye measurements, because the eye measurements, it was somewhat of a window to what was happening to the brain. And by measuring eye movements, we could see any kind of abnormal neurologic abnormality, and sometimes quite early. So it became apparent, and even now, the FDA has recognized that eye movement tracking is the most accurate method for detecting a concussion, and it's FDA approved for detecting concussions. There are two other predicate devices out there. They're office-based, and they're big. They're rather bulky pieces of equipment. They're not readily available to most communities, and our goal is to put this in a face guard where every athlete can be tested in real time, as I said, and on the field. And therefore, any small community all across the United States could potentially use this. I'm here in Texas. I'm here in San Antonio, seventh largest city in the United States, and there's no other predicate device even in this city. So those other devices are not in any small community. They're just in large metropolitan areas, and there's not a lot of them out there. But I was primarily inspired by the need and by the fact that there's nothing out there to prevent concussions. Having friends, having family members who have had concussions, and now having grandsons who want to play contact sports, I'm keenly interested in finding something that can protect these athletes who are involved in contact sports.
Dr. Krueger, you mentioned that contemporary methods of concussion measurements were big, heavy, can't really be used on the spot. I know I've seen other similar startup companies that use like mouth guards or stuff like that to measure force input into the brain and onto the skull, and thus measure concussions or predict concussions that way. What makes EyeTrac technology stand out compared to that type of technology?
Well, that's a great question. And that's probably one of the biggest differentiating factors, because those devices, and you're familiar, you've probably seen watching sports on TV with football players, you see this plate in the center of the helmet. They're force plates, they're right in the center. Rydell makes some, they've shut, but that is helmet telemetry in essence. And what they are, they're impact plates that can detect force of impact, direction of impact. They can give you information about the impact, but technically it does nothing to provide information about the neurological status. And that's the major difference. The same thing is true with the mouthpieces. They can give you information about impacts, but they really don't define what has actually happened to the neurologic system. What is uniquely different about ours, it's got high sensitivity, it's got far more accuracy. It is the only one of those that can really detect the neurological status by doing far more testing than any other devices. And of course, it works on the field and in real time. We also have a very robust intellectual property that surrounds the technology and supports the technology. which the others are lacking with respect to what it does for the neurological assessment. There are also some sideline tests that you may be aware of that have been used in the past. The problem with sideline tests, they do not track or measure eye movements directly. Those can only be done with eye sensors. As you mentioned, you've probably seen, and perhaps even playing sports yourselves, you've seen some people on the sideline hold their finger up and ask you to look at a finger as the finger is moving. And again, these are such fine eye movements that finger test of watching it move in space really cannot capture some of these fine eye movements. You have to put a sensor on them to measure this type of abnormality.
So how do you expect EyeTrac to like expand in like the coming future? So I know you're starting to have sales in the near future. So what else are you expecting to expand upon for EyeTrac?
Well, because of the robust intellectual properties that we have, we will, as I said, first address the youth football. Once we get this marketing and sales program really begun after the first year, we then plan to extend this to other contact levels, college football, pro football, and then probably by the third year, we will expand to using other types of display systems, such as the visor and the face shield, where we can project an image. Again, we have intellectual property that can also be used with virtual reality, augmented devices, so we can use different platform systems to use this technology and test individuals in a variety of different manners. Therefore, we could use augmented reality. That won't, of course, be in real play, but we could use it in other environments, military environments, because one of the greatest injuries that the military has would be blast concussions. And then there's the commercial side that could be used in any emergency room. Since these are portable, they're inexpensive compared to any other device that was previously out there. It could be, for example, be used in all emergency rooms to detect concussions if someone comes in having had a head injury. So the face guard is going to be the first step. And then we plan, in essence, to move to other platform systems.
Sounds good. So I guess just bouncing off that, where do you think the field of sports and safety in that field, like where do you think that'll head towards in the future? Just in regards to safety in general, like is there any specific technology besides just EyeTrac that you think will play like a really big role in player safety?
Well, there is also, there's certainly by the NFL, and some of the manufacturers now feel a really need to improve helmet safety. But the NFL has had a head challenge program in which they've encouraged companies, universities to develop better helmet technology to prevent concussions. I think there's been some shortcoming, and we also have some intellectual property, I think, to do a better job with helmet design and development. We're not far enough along to really discuss that right now, but it does incorporate this face guard and face shield technology. But I think definitely there are some mechanical things that can be significant to improve the current helmet technology that's out there now. They've made big advances, and some helmets are, I think, better than others. There certainly is some reticence on the base for parents, and even for me as having grandchildren right now with the current technology with helmets. You would like for your child or your grandchild to certainly be using the best headwear they can get to mitigate or prevent a concussion. I think it's on the horizon. I think some people are still somewhat reluctant to have their child or even for players to be involved in contact sports compared to what it was previously. But I'm optimistic that the evolution of technology will cover that so that it's of a less concern in the future.
Dr. Krueger, just moving on. I was just wondering, how was EyeTrac affected by the COVID-19 pandemic? Because I know since you guys are a relatively recent startup, or at least, yeah. I was just wondering how the pandemic has affected your progress, especially when it comes to, making sales and all that sort of stuff.
Well, we've been fortunate because where we are now, we're a small company, and it really has had no bearing on us whatsoever. Some of the other special engineering issues that we've had, we've outsourced those. They've been very contained, and personally, it has not slowed us down that much. So, and since we're not out doing face-to-face sales at this point, it has not affected us. Now we're optimistic too with more vaccinations out there, and as people get more exposure and have some immunity, it's going to be less of an issue toward the end of the year.
So, to anyone who wants to enter into the field of sports technology and safety, what advice would you recommend for them to study or to look into?
Well, that's a great question, a tough question, but obviously you have to have some passion about where you want to find yourself and what aspect of it. There's a lot of room for growth in this field, and there's so many things that can be done, whether you want to work on something that's related to helmet design, mitigating concussions, whether you want to work on some other piece of equipment for another reason. I don't think we'll ever find an end point to what can be improved. There's always something that can be done. And, that's the wonderful part of it. So no matter what we do, we know in the future, we're going to have an opportunity to improve upon it. So I think it's very much open to whatever you're interested in.
And Dr. Krueger, sort of as like a final closing sort of question, if any of our listeners are interested in EyeTrac and the technology you guys offer, where could they either reach you guys or learn about the technology you guys are putting out?
Sure. They can just send me an email. It's wkruegermd1@gmail.com.
Sweet. Sounds good. I just want to thank you for hopping on the podcast with us. We really appreciate your presence. If you have any final words for anybody listening, go ahead.
No, I thank you. I'm always happy to talk about the new technology that's emerging related to mitigating concussions. I think y'all have done a great job, and I'm impressed by what you do, and I thank for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you. That's it from us. To listeners, stay safe and stay tuned for the next one.
Thank you very much, and y'all take care and be safe.